Hey everybody, hope and pray that you're doing well today as we come to our word from the word. And today, that word is help. Help. It's kind of the words that you would imagine hearing as Jonah was there in the water, as he got thrown off the boat, and that's where we left off yesterday. So today, just jumping right in there at the end of chapter 1, verse 17. This is Jonah chapter 1, starting in verse 17, then we'll be moving into chapter 2. He says, "Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the fish's belly, and he said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me, and all your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The waters surrounded me even to my soul. The deep closed around me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the moorings of the mountains. The earth with its bars closed behind me forever." Now, see, as we look at this, and I want us to see a couple of things, but in kind of the opposite side, we're going to look at half the prayer today. We'll look at half the prayer in our next video, which will be Monday. So he cried out. Notice that here is as soon as he's thrown into the water, right? He begins, as he's kind of reflecting back in his prayer, that he cried out for help, right? He cried out for help in his affliction. Now, that's not hard for us to believe. If any of us were thrown into the sea in the midst of that storm, or if you were drowning, you would cry out for anyone to help you, and especially if you just assumed that there was certain death. I mean, for him, death was certain. He knew there's no way he could survive. There's no way he could make it. And so I believe at this moment we're gonna see, not to go too far ahead, but we're going to see in the next video, we're going to see that he's certain in the rest of this prayer that he's certain of salvation after the fact. But right now, he's certain of death. And, there comes a time for all of us that, we have to understand when we get away from God, and we have to understand the depravity of our sin and the awful separation that sin causes as we're running from God, as he was talking about. And so to understand this, notice that he cries out. Now, God had already told him to cry out, but God told him to cry out against none of them. Go cry out to them so that they would see God and have a chance to repent. Now, we know that obviously he eventually does this, but right now, at this point in the story, he's not worried about crying out to them, but he's worried about crying out for his own skin, for his own salvation. Now, keep that in the back of your mind, because isn't it amazing that now he's suddenly concerned with what God's will is? All of a sudden, now he's concerned with what God's will is for his life. Because, it was only a short time ago, right before he got on this boat, and we don't know the exact time frame, but we know that he hurried up and went in the wrong direction. And so isn't it amazing that all of a sudden now he's concerned with God's will, when just that short time before, he was only concerned with what he wanted. He wasn't concerned with what God wanted him to do. What God wanted him to do did concern him enough that it made him run the other way. But here's the thing. So he cries out for help. And that's why I put that as our word for the day. That he cried out for help. And I mean, we all do the same thing. We cry out for God to help us in our times of affliction. The problem is with that, and this is not the focus of today, but we also need to cry out to him when things are going great, right? We need to cry out to him in praise when things are going great, not just cry out for help when there's something that doesn't go our way. But here's the thing. He cries out for help, and a loving, merciful God that we serve, what does he do? He sends help. But I want you to notice that he not only sent help, if you heard it there at the end of chapter 1, that God had prepared a great fish. Now, there's a lot of speculation, rather, about, okay, well, it was, we'll say, well, it was a whale, and it says it's a great fish, and then that word prepared, it could have been prepared just for this particular time. I believe more or less this was a real, it probably was a whale, but I mean, it's not unheard of, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But to just think that God had prepared this because he knew what was going to happen. See, God in his foreknowledge already knew the course of events, and so he had prepared the fish. Now the fish was being obedient. We can't overlook that the fish was the one in the story that was being obedient the whole time. This whale, whatever you want to call it, he was being obedient the whole time. But God had prepared the fish. He had prepared it, I'm just going to say, for two reasons today. I believe he prepared the fish for protection, right? This was protection for Jonah. Without it, I mean, before we think, man, that's not protection, but before, if the whale or the fish never showed up, he certainly would have died. Yes, God could have rescued him another way, but I believe that this fish was prepared for two reasons. And the first was protection. It was to save his life. And I just have this in my notes here that, sometimes it's kind of similar. When we're running from God and we cry out to him in our affliction, that's at our fault, right? When we've gotten away from him, that sometimes God does send help, but he sends us sometimes, he puts us in smelly, uncomfortable, dark places. And I believe that he does that sometimes just to protect us from something worse. You say, well, man, I can't imagine things being any worse than they are. Well, I always say things can often be better, but they can always be worse. And I'm sure probably at the moment, Jonah might not have been really thinking clearly enough to say that things could be worse. But as he's talking through his prayer, he realizes he could have been dead. So the whale, the fish, was a protector for him. But see, I believe the second reason that God prepared this fish is because he was preparing to change Jonah's heart. He was preparing Jonah's heart to change. Now, you notice that it's funny that in this prayer, we don't read of Jonah complaining. Now, he complains at other points in the book, but we don't see him complaining about being inside the whale. Now, maybe he didn't remember a lot of it. Maybe he did. Maybe he just chose not to discuss it. I think really maybe the reason that he chose not to is because he was alive. Because he realized that it was protection, right? And maybe that was his first change of heart. Now, you can look up, and some people, don't believe this story. We talked about that a little bit already, that, they think it's just a good fable, good story, but it wasn't real. For one, why do we know his father's name what difference would it make? We don't need to know who his father is if he wasn't a real person and this wasn't a real event. But look, you can go back, you can Google this right after this video. Look, you go look up 1891, right? The year 1891, off the Falkland Islands, a man was swallowed by a huge sperm whale. Right? You can read the whole story, but basically they go. I think they tried to harpoon the whale, and he swings his tail and knocks one boat over or destroys it. Two men go in the water, and one was missing. The next day, or I think it was. I think from the story it's about 15 hours. But anyway, they come back and they find the same whale, kill it, bring it, cut it open, and the man is inside and lives to tell about it. But the thing is that, look, his skin was bleached because of the acid in the stomach. He was blind for the rest of his life. And we don't see these things with Jonah, but I imagine that anything like that, any trial, any storm like that, any protective, nasty place like that, it didn't seem nice at the time. But after the fact, realizing that, it still could have been worse. I could have been dead, but I'm alive. And see, I believe that was kind of the change of heart. So I wonder today, and here's kind of where we're going to drive it home for all of us today, is I wonder, is maybe God trying to change your heart as well? Maybe you're saying, man, I'm in this stinky, nasty, uncomfortable situation. Maybe God has prepared this fish. Let's just call it this fish that's surrounding you right now, because he's trying to change your heart. Maybe you've been running from God, but he's using this because as you've gotten into your affliction, that all of a sudden now you've begun to have a change of heart. See, here's the thing. Just like Jonah didn't complain, or we don't read about him complaining about that, let me encourage you and encourage myself as well. Let us not complain when we're in these storms of correction, when we're in these difficult places that God is protecting us from something far worse. Let's be careful not to complain, but instead, let's change. Right? That's what was going on with Jonah. While he was in there, he's having a change of heart. And so today, we need to do a little bit less complaining. Or let me go back and say a lot less complaining and a lot more changing. God bless you. And I pray you have a great, great day.